Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Big League Breakdowns. This is episode 6 of our reboot of the series, and my name is Tyler. Joining me today again is Will and John and Bobby behind the everything. We're having a crazy conversation before this, so John needs to get it together. But having said all that, we
If you
are
guys
going
ever
to be
want to get in
discussing
production, just
today.
don't, because you have to deal with the stuff that these three decide to throw at me with 2 minutes left to showtime. So thanks for
That
Minute and a
we thing is
half.
absolutely crazy. Today we're going to be talking about the Dodgers once again, as they've been a talking point for not only us but a lot of the MLB community this offseason. But we have a question that we have kind of been talking about off air, and then we decided to make an episode out of it. How many World Series do the Dodgers need to win in the next 10 years to justify all of their spending? I mean, again, obviously headlining the offseason with Ohtani and Yamamoto and spending over $1 billion just this offseason. So today, again, we are going to discuss how many they need to win to justify. And I know this is going to be a pretty heated debate, or at least a lengthy debate, because we all have kind of differing opinions on this. I personally have kind of flip flop back and forth on my original opinion and stuff like that. So it should be interesting. Will, I'll send it to you first. I guess let's set the scenario for the Dodgers. I mean, their offseason is absolutely crazy. They get their top two guys. They're set for the future, or at least that's what they hope. And I mean, for them, it really could not have been any better this offseason.
No, it absolutely could not have been any better. They have absolutely decked not only their offense, but they've decked out also their pitching, and they are set for at least the next half decade, if not more, to have a lot of success. But like you, I also went very back and forth between the number that I thought the Dodgers would need to justify the spending they did this offseason over the next 10 years. Because there's some dynamite dynasty teams in the past that had a lot of World Series wins. There's some that didn't. And so that's kind of where I've tried to decide where do I think the Dodgers compare most to, I think, with what's ahead of them. So at the moment, if we're just talking World Series wins, I'm going to say the Dodgers need 3 World Series wins over the next 10 years to be considered a successful spending spree this offseason.
Interesting.
I mean, yeah, with $1 billion, I would hope so.
Yeah.
Good lord.
I do want to add, by the way, you said compare. So in doing kind of like some background, I was trying to look like what is a comparison to this Dodgers team, not only for baseball but like across the sports. It's kind of really hard to find a comparison because, for one, the way the Ohtani contract is structured, they're like not. I think they're like eighth right now in payroll for this season. Obviously, like he's getting $68 million in his 40s, but like okay, you could say, well, based on their salary cap, like oh, they're spending so much, like blah blah. Like if you look at it at face value for this season, they're really not even the top of that. And it's also hard to look at other sports because of there being a salary cap. Like, look, you can look at like the Miami Heat teams that dominated the late 2000s, early 2010s, and LeBron and Wade and Bosch and stuff, and obviously all the success they had. But it's really tough for me, at least, to find a comparable to these guys because, again, with the contract of Ohtani, it kind of I feel like it's just a weird variable that kind of makes it tough to quantify, in my opinion, at least. So I don't know
So
how you feel about that.
So I've looking back over the past 30 years for baseball, so roughly 1994. There's 3 teams that I've kind of pulled out as comparisons for what the Dodgers are probably aiming for. Maybe a 4th team. I kind of have thought about throwing the Giants in here also and what they did in the early 2010s. But the 3 teams I'm mainly looking at are the New York Yankees from about 1996 to 2005, the Atlanta Braves from again around the same time period. I think it was early '90s to about so '96 to 2005 as well, '95 to 2004, and then the Houston Astros, which are still currently in their run since they won the World Series back in 2017, up to what they're doing now. The Yankees and the Braves are the real, like, side by side, two fantastic dynasty teams that had very different postseason success. And partially because their teams overlapped constantly throughout the late 90s and early 2000s with success. You had the Atlanta Braves, where from 1995 to 2004, in fact, I'm going to back it up even a bit more. I'm going to say 1991 to 2000. Actually, 2001. I'm going to nix the 1994 strike year since there was no playoff run, or there was no playoffs that year. Those 10 years, Braves made the playoffs all 10 years. They made the World Series 5 times. They only won the World Series once. And that was when you had Chipper Jones, Andrew Jones, Greg Maddux, John Smoltz, Tom Glavine. They won one World Series in 95. If you take the Yankees from, again, another 10-year time period from 1996 to 2005, they made the playoffs all 10 years. They made, I believe it is 6 World Series, and they won 4 of them, winning all 4 of those World Series within just a 5-year span as well. So right there, then you have two very, if you look back and say, what are some of the best teams that have ever been in baseball? Both of those teams would be in that conversation as to some of the best that there was. However, their success is very different. Sure, they made the playoffs every year, but Braves won the 1 World Series, Yankees won the 4. So when you're looking at the Dodgers, it's like, all right, you just spent all this money. So is it fair to say you win 1 World Series over these 10 years? That is a success? Or does it need to be more like the Yankees and be 4, 3, 4, maybe 5, surpass them?
You need at least 3.
Also,
there's no doubt about that. You need at least 3 because you've spent more money than anyone in the history of baseball. A league that has no salary cap, and you've spent the most in one off season. So I think that when it comes down to the Dodgers, I don't even know if there is a comparison in baseball when it comes to something like this, because you have, honestly, probably the only comparison is, Tyler was right, is like you got to go to like a league like the NBA where where they can spend money hand over fist and not even blink an eye. So I think when you look at it, the Dodgers have no comparison here in terms of the amount of money. So yeah, I would say they need to at least win 3. At least win 3.
All right.
There's
All right.
no doubt about that.
So, all right. Well, this is where I'm going to chime in now of the conversation because let's add some additional math and fractions into this for a second. So if
Oh God,
let's go off of like Shohei's contract just as like the good baseline here, obviously, since he's like the guy, right? So 10 years from now, right, is when he's a free agent, right? If you're talking 3 World Series titles in 10 years, 3 out of 10. So 30% of the years that you spent on the Dodgers, you only win 3 with the amount of money that you're making over that time. Is that still enough with that in mind? Because that's less than half. And this is on top of the fact that you got. Is this being fair or is it being worth it? Because we're talking about a completely different animal here. Like, screw fair. They're not playing fair. Do you see how much money they're spending? Like, that's the problem
baseball
here. And that's why
is not fair.
Well, that's my thing here is like we're trying to be fair to a team that's not playing fair. Shohei Ohtani was convinced to just shove all his payday to the end of his damn contract so that the LA Dodgers had more room to add even more firepower to the franchise. So if they're not going to play fair, why are we going to be fair to them and give them only a 30% success rate? That's my question.
So
because it's incredibly difficult to win the World Series.
Oh, I'm not
you
saying
can be
it
the
isn't.
best team in the league and get bounced in the first round.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly
I will say
fair.
this. I do think the Dodgers will make the World Series at least 5, if not 6 times over that 10-year span. I know you're saying wins, but I do think if you're going to go with how many times they'll make it, they're going to make it, I think, half of that time. So that alone, if you want to say, is, all right, you win 3 World Series, but you make half of the next 10 years you make the World Series, then I feel like that is good. At least if you can win if you're in the World Series 5 times, you can win more than half of what that would be. So if you make the World Series 7 times over the next 10 years, you win 4, that would be successful. Whereas if you're doing like
I'm
what
gonna
the
disagree
Dodgers
with
do
you.
now and you make the World Series 3 times and you win 1, then it's a huge
I'm gonna
waste.
disagree with you.
Wait, John,
I
John,
think
before you pipe in real quick, I want to ask one question for Will. I'm sorry. Okay, so Will,
Mhm.
real quick, because you brought up making the World Series, like making it 6 times. Do you consider
Mhm.
making the World Series period a good thing for the Dodgers case? Because let's look at our case, unfortunately, as much as I'm going to stab you in the heart here and I'm sorry, but for the Phillies, right?
Mhm.
Didn't make it
Yes.
last year, made it the year prior. Was that a good thing? Even if we didn't win it, especially with like last year, we didn't make it, got to the top 4. We're pissed with that result, right?
Mhm.
Even though
Um,
they weren't projected to even get there in the first place.
right. I mean, the way I would say it is that's and this is where you're probably going to try to throw it back at me at things I've just said, but the 2022 season was worth going to the World Series, or at least it was a win because not only were we not expected to make it, the fact that we ended up being the National League representative, the National League champions, just made if we win the World Series, it's the icing on the cake. Like it was already a above and beyond season. Um, Last year, if you had asked me in October, like right after they got eliminated, was this season a bust or was it not worth it? Or did they fail? I probably would have said yes. And mainly because the competition they were facing in the NLCS was inferior to them, and the fact that the Phillies were, for a decent portion of the series, obviously not the entire 7 games, they were playing as they should have been. They were definitely the better team. They went up 2-0. They went back to Philly, up 3 games to 2. They just needed to win one, but they didn't. But they didn't get to the World Series. However, I knew going into the 2023 season that it is really, really hard to get to the World Series in back to back years, even though I knew the team was better and that we could take on anyone in the National League to get to the World Series. Just statistically, it just does not happen. So the fact that we went to the NLCS after making the World Series the previous year, I would consider that still a successful year, even though the outcome wasn't as good as the previous year, and we wanted more. We wanted, and probably many could argue, should have really been the front runners entering the championship series to get the World Series.
From an outsider's perspective, I would say that you have the right in Philly to be disappointed and extremely disappointed because not because you lost, but because you didn't take that next step. And that next step is getting to the World Series when and eventually winning it when you could have, or it honestly should have, being you face the Diamondbacks. But going back to the Dodgers here, when it comes to this standard. We got to factor in one man that is involved with this team every single day that cannot win in the playoffs when it's actually the playoffs and not a Mickey Mouse playoffs, and that is Dave Roberts. As long as he's the manager, the Dodgers are not going to win the World Series.
That's a pretty. I mean, look, I'm not the biggest fan of Roberts either, but with this roster, I mean, if he can't get it done this year or next year, he probably will be out. So, a couple things
He should have
from
done
my
it
standpoint
last
with this.
year. Last
Oh,
year
I mean,
was
I think,
ridiculous.
yeah, I think for a while. I mean,
They were
I've been on the
Last
train for a
yeah,
while.
they were
last year
playing
they
fantasy
had a
baseball last
boatload
year.
They had a boatload of pitching issues. They had injuries and just they didn't have a staff, and that was kind of the immediate like
No,
yellow
no.
flag
The
entering the
Dodgers
postseason.
don't get those. They don't get those excuses. This is proven.
Why
This
don't they?
season, because this season proved they don't get this excuse. They don't get that excuse. They can buy their replacements. They
Then
can
why do they
buy
only get
what they
3?
want
Then why do they only get 3 World Series titles?
because
Got him.
of that. Because of that man. Because of Dave Roberts. That's the reason why. Until they go away from Dave Roberts, they're going to get bounced in the DS, no matter what.
No, but okay. So the problem is the question is it's not we're not answering will they. We're answering what does it take to make this worth it? So if your precedent is going to be 3, but you're also on the other hand saying like, oh, Dave Roberts is going to screw all of that up with this roster though, like. I don't know how he even comes in as a factor. Like I feel like just by itself, you could have you could pick someone off the street, and I feel like you can't screw this up. Like if we're gonna afford the luxuries of what
You would think, but
it'd be with the amount of
know,
money they spend, that injuries don't matter. They don't need a staff and this, that, and the other thing. Then you also can't say on the same token that they, as soon as they get 3, yep, we're done. That was absolutely worth it. That's all I'm saying.
I am being fair and giving them 3 because it is hard to win the World Series. I'm trying to be nice in saying that. But when it comes to what they should win 6. You have the
That's a
best
lot.
player in baseball. You have the best
Is it though?
player in baseball. Arguably,
I,
maybe even the best player in the history of baseball since Babe Ruth. So with the
slow
factor of
down.
that, you have, you know, you have to take those things into consideration. The Dodgers have set themselves up for nothing but failure when it comes to this. If they don't deliver, it is always going to be a failure over this next 10 years. There is no, oh, well, we weren't expected to go that far. No, they don't get that. They don't get that anymore.
I mean, I agree to that
Frankly,
sense.
they didn't get it to begin with. But they don't get that. They don't get what the Phillies got. Where it's the consolation. Oh, we got this far. It's gravy. They need to win it
Hmm.
all, or it's a bust.
Yeah, that part I agree with, right? Like, you have this expectation now, especially with the Dodgers already having high expectations. Yes, from their fan base, if they, in the next, even let's just say 5 years, because, maybe their team changes after that. If they don't win the World Series every year, that year they'll look at it as a bust, right? But if you look at it
As they
over a
should.
long period, maybe, yeah, I agree. But over a long period, I think, you know, that's when narratives can change. Originally going into this, or when me and Bobby had talked a long way back, I had said 3 would be a success, 4 would be a dynasty. Now, you guys are talking about 6 and stuff. Will, I'm going to ask you a question because I think this is
Mhm.
kind of a big point in this. You talked about the Braves team and the Yankees team from the 90s and early 2000s. While they were obviously great teams, I think we can agree that the standard of the league was not what it is now, and that winning the World Series now is even harder than it was then, and it was hard then. And sometimes the MLB playoffs at this point are kind of a crapshoot, right? So I don't know. I guess what would be your argument if you have one for this, or kind of your point, you know, with the Dodgers, where I think the situation that they're in 2024 is harder to win, although again, they should be able to win, right?
No, they absolutely should win. Um, I mean, the way I came up with 3 and keep it very basic is, as I kind of said before, you win a World Series one year, you make it to a World Series, let alone winning it. It's hard to repeat the next year. Obviously, this team is different, but it's still hard to do, which is why I felt like 5 out of 10 years is a successful thing. And then for the Dodgers to truly feel like it was worth it, they need to win more than half of those 5 games, or those 5 World Series years. And that's the 3. Um, but the big challenge that you have, or one of the biggest challenges you have now, um, than what you had back in the mid and late 90s, is that there's a lot more playoff teams. What, nearly double
Yeah.
now? Um, so you're going to have to not only, obviously, you get a bye if you're going to have one of the top 2 teams. The Dodgers will get a bye every year, probably in the next 10 years. There's no doubt in my mind that that will happen. But now they have to, and trying to get over any potential rust of not playing for a week is a whole other argument for another time. But you have the factor of, you're playing a lot more teams. You have to win more games now to win it all. Or at least, was it? I guess if you technically with the bye, no, you don't need to win more. It would only be if you were a wild card team. But you're still battling more teams, and it is proven, at least with the new parameters of the playoff format that there is something about the teams that are playing all the time that have the lower records that can succeed. I also have thoughts about this Dodgers pitching staff's success in the postseason and Dave Roberts' history of making poor pitching decisions that could hinder it. So I do kind of understand what John's saying. But I mean, times are always going to change. I think the Dodgers in the next 5 years is going to be the real indicator of how successful they are because the team will change a lot. They'll buy more talent. They'll have young guys come out that they'll probably give chances on. But I don't feel like you need 5 or 6 to be a success, though I know the demand is going to be that way over these next 10 years. I feel like looking back, regardless of how times change or whatever, you're still going to look over the overall success of just how far you can get in the postseason and the World Series you get, and the talent you had on that team and how hard it is to just, first of all, get that much talent, that much star power together. And that's what they're really going to be remembered on, is that success. If they miss a playoff 1 year, that could honestly hinder the whole thing.
Well,
Let's
I was
put it
going to
this
say, I mean,
way.
playoffs are one thing, yeah, for sure. Like if they're
Well,
missing a playoff, that's a problem.
yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. That would be what somebody's getting fired. Heads are rolling. Uh,
Yeah.
and honestly, when you look at the Dodgers, they are since 2013 have been incredibly successful. If we have the time, I would like to go through this. You have
Go
the
ahead. I was
lost
going to ask about that
NLCS,
too.
lost NLDS, lost NLDS, lost NLCS, lost World Series, lost NLDS, won World Series in 2020, lost NLCS, lost NLDS, and lost NLDS. The Dodgers in that time frame were an incredible team. Uh, no matter what, regardless of who they had, they just continuously got better and have. Honestly, they're trying to essentially. I feel like they're trying the Steinbrenner model of buy a championship. That's what I feel like they're doing, and that's it has been proven in today's baseball, in today's MLB, you cannot do that because of the amount of teams in the postseason. You have to get hot at the right time, and the Dodgers always seem to cool off come end of September, going into October. And I don't know whether that's because of their manager. I don't know whether that's because the players are tired. I don't know whether it's because of who knows, maybe the media being in their face and they're exhausted. Who knows? But when you look at the Dodgers overall, and I even threw out this stat before the show, they have literally not finished last in their division since 1992. The last time the Dodgers finished last, there were 6 teams in the NL West. Like it that's ridiculous. That is over 30 years of consistency, and at this point close to 11 years of just being the best team in the NL West and arguably one of the best teams in baseball. And for one World Series in that time frame, how do you justify that? So to go back to Bobby's point here, I'm raising my number from 3 to 4. You got to win 4. You have to match the Yankees of the late 90s, early 2000s and get 4. If you don't, this was all just worthless. This was money pissed away.
But doesn't that go to like a counterpoint though? Like you're talking about how they've made the playoffs all these times, but they haven't had the success. And look, I know they've been ridiculed for that. Like they're one of the teams that does get ridiculed the most for their lack of playoff success. But they have multiple 100-win seasons and they get bounced in the NLDS. Like that, I think, kind of testifies to how hard it is to win a World Series at this point in time with the number of teams. You talked about teams getting hot. Like it is just a crapshoot. And I think that's what makes it harder for them than it is those early, the earlier teams. I still think you look at them and they probably want 3 again. I think 3 would be nice. Maybe you're okay with 2, but 4 cements the dynasty. The other part of this, and I kind of want to ask Bobby this because, you know, we're all talking about the success on the field, right? But let's look at it in another aspect. Let's look from a money standpoint. They spend $1 billion this offseason. They're paying obviously a lot of money. The guys they bring in obviously are very marketable. Shohei Ohtani is super marketable. He'll be for a long time. He's going to make them a ton of money. Yamamoto, if he pans out, is going to make them a ton of money. They're going to continue getting top free agents year after year, especially because of this Ohtani contract. Really, the top free agents you're going to have to put on the radar for the Dodgers for the next 10 years, really. So, from a money standpoint, let's say hypothetically they win 2 World Series in 10 years. Is it a success because okay they won and from their standpoint they're making so much money, the organization is thriving, like, and I'm asking you because I feel like you sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, so from that standpoint what do you think?
All right. So, so I can't. There's going to be a multi-part answer, and I'm sorry. So the first thing is that like, if the Dodgers didn't win in 2020, I'm not getting into the Mickey Mouse BS. That I don't care. It's a title because we're outsiders, so of course we're going to call it a Mickey Mouse. But for like the actual fans, I'm sure they're not calling it a Mickey Mouse. I'm sure they're reveling in that one, right? So if they didn't win as recently as they did, full season or not, I feel like this is a different conversation, right? Like if they haven't won in like, let's say they had something like the Cubs dry run before they won in 2017, right? So like even one World Series, I feel like would lessen the blow, as weird as it is. It's the fact that they've already been a successful franchise and have prided themselves and have been one of the most hated franchises because of how rich they are, how much they're able to avoid big players time and time again. It's the fact that they've been doing this over the past 10 years. If you're going to spend $1 billion and you're going to break all sorts of offseason records in signing 2 players, then it better be damn worth it. And you better get, I would say, at least 5 at that point. Because if you're in a position where you're able to do that, and you're going to make such a big splash like you did, I just feel like you have to at least get a 50% shot. I'm not ever going to discount how hard it is for any club to win a World Series. I get it, all right? There is a lot of baseball to be played in a normal season. Maybe too much for some people, okay? But with a no salary cap, I have no sympathy, and I'm not going to play softball with the Dodgers. If they're going to spend this amount of money, I'm just not going to do it. So to me, if you're going to spend this money, you have to go at least 50. It just doesn't make any sense to go otherwise. And I'll even take it a step further. You better not get less than a top 4 for 8 of the next 10 years. I'll say that much.
So
I do agree with. I agree with that 100%.
Like that, I'll say.
You have no excuse. I understand, like, you can get bounced in the championship series because somebody just happens to be better than you for 7 games. But for what the Dodgers consistently do is get bounced in the DS after getting a first round bye. Like, this is it, that they cannot do that anymore for this to be seen as, even somewhat successful.
So okay, let me say this then. Let's say hypothetically they win 2 World Series. They make the World Series, I don't know, 5, 6 times in 10 years, and the rest of the times they make like the NLDS 3 times or the NLCS 3 times and the NLDS once. Like, so they have all that under their belt. Plus, they're in the green with making money. Like, I know from a fan's perspective, if you're a Dodgers fan, you look at that and say, man, say, 20 years from now, you look and say, man, Otani's gone. Like, we got 2 World Series, but we really could have been a dynasty. We could have made it 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever the case may be. But in this time, they got their 2 World Series. They were successful every year. They might have not won it every year, but they were successful every year. They put butts in seats, a lot of it. They made profit. Like, I think that's still successful. It's not as successful, again, as cementing yourself as a dynasty, but I don't think I'll put it to you this way. If they do whatever, if they do exactly what I just laid out in the next 10 years, I don't think you can classify it as a failure, at least. You might not be able to say it's a
Now,
success,
hold
but
on.
it's not a
You're talking
failure.
about business versus on-field play here in that sense. Because you're right, they're going to sell tickets and they're going to make money hand over fist, and they'll probably be able to spend $10 billion after all this is said and done. But
Don't put
that's
that into the universe. Please don't.
I'm being realistic. The Yankees are trying to play catch up with the Joneses with the Dodgers at this point.
Yankees are playing catch up with the Rays.
Well,
Well,
all right. I'm talking about spending money. I'm not talking about the quality. So the bar
there's
is
definitely
getting
a difference,
raised.
but oh yeah, I mean, for sure. Look, again, there is a difference between on-field play and business. I just think there is a perspective you have to take where you take, you put business in mind. From a fan's perspective down the line, they're not going to care about that. I understand that. And when we view this in 10 years, we're not going to look at the business and whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I'm saying in this next 10 years, year by year by year, if they're doing this, I think you can't quantify it as a failure. Like, I think we all agree that 3 is like the minimum for it to be called a success, just based
Mhm.
purely on World Series, if you look at it like that. But I think there's other ways to take it. I mean, look, there. Who knows? Like, there's a chance. I think they will win a World Series in the next 10 years. But let's say they win one in the next 10 years. Like, at that point, yeah, that's probably a failure. But do you hear the bar we're setting for these guys? Like, 6 World Series. That's insane in 10
They
years in this
set the bar
MLB.
themselves. They spent $1
Oh,
billion
I get
in
it.
1 year
I
on 2
I
players.
I get it, but like 6 World Series is like unheard of in this day and age. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
the Astros have been
Sorry,
incredible, and they're not even close to that.
The
So
closest
I don't
team
know.
that you could
spend
argue had a dynasty within a recent year, and that's not even really a dynasty, just playoff success, are the Giants in the early 2010s because they won the World Series 3 times in 5 years. Like,
Yeah, and
I guess
like,
the question is, was that as I mean, that was a success, clearly. So
but
is that
yeah, I mean,
what I
they
mean,
were
speak.
a
I
if the
speak with
success.
envy.
Dodgers did
By the
that.
way, I
Hmm?
speak with envy because it
I don't
makes me
know.
mad.
I think so. The Giants are interesting, but expand that over 10 years. Like it's tough. Like, I think the fact that we're putting this 10-year cap is kind of a big talking point because what the Astros, right? Like, when would you consider the Astros a I don't know if dynasty is the right word. Like, what's the step down from dynasty? Like,
Um,
what would you consider their success
Success,
over the
successful.
last since
since
they've been
2017,
really good.
roughly.
Yeah, yeah.
Since the I mean, the fact that they can make the postseason every year and get to the American League Championship Series every year, since 2017, um, they've made it to the AL Championship Series every year, at least. Um, so I mean, I'd call that a dynasty, regardless if they've only won 2 World Series. Um,
Right.
and that's where I feel
Which is
like with the what. Sorry, you go
sorry.
with the rest of your question.
So no, I was just saying, like, so the Astros, I think, are a somewhat fair comparison. So you look at that, and because they have the 2 World Series, and then they have these championships. Like, that's what I'm saying. I don't think we can expect every single year that they're either going to be in it or win it to say they're successful, because the Astros have arguably been the best team in baseball in recent memory, and they only have two, and we consider them like a dynasty. Like
Are we
it's
And I
are we
agree with
not
no,
are
I-
we not putting an
But
asterisk on
here's
that
the
dynasty
thing.
though?
well, that's a whole different. Don't even get me started on
Well,
that. Like,
but isn't
no,
that not a
I
fair
know.
question?
I mean,
No, I
yeah,
know what you
no,
mean.
he's right. He is right. He is right.
Well, because
Okay.
because
He's got a
like okay, so my question then is if we're considering that a dynasty,
would the Dodgers
like-
have two in this?
like what
in
like
this
what's the
stretch?
first is the first thing you think of with that team? Oh my god, they were so good. They were a dynasty. Or was it a goddamn trash can? Like what do you think of when you think
Yeah.
of that team?
No, I mean,
think of a little bit
he's
of
right.
both.
He's right.
Yeah.
He's right. Oh,
You think a
no.
little bit of both.
But
You think-
what's the prevailing thought there?
I don't. Yeah, I think.
the
I think
thought to
Bobby
me
has a good point here. I do think that they did kind of disqualify themselves with the whole trash can thing from the dynasty
Listen,
model.
that's a
or
whole
dynasty
separate
label.
that's a whole separate debate. I totally get it, and it's been beaten to death at this point, and I think I even brought it up in the last episode. So just to kind of save myself here, like, I guess what I'm just trying to point out is, like, we need a better example. Like, there has to be a better example that we can use to kind of use as like a baseline for like what a dynasty is, because I know in the modern day, I guess that's the closest thing we can get to that, but remember, it's a little marred. That's all I'm saying.
Well, then let's
So
take the
can
Yankees
I-
from the late
can I take
90s.
this-
Hold on, now.
Yeah,
Now,
I was
my
about to
turn.
say that too. Oh, I was agreeing with
We're
you.
going to take the Yankees
with
from
you.
the late 90s or mid 90s to 2000. They won 4 World Series in 5 years. That's probably what the Dodgers are going to compare them, what they need to do right now. Regardless of what they will do, that's what their goal is. They're going to try to match that, because to beat that, you have to win the World Series in 5 years, and I'm not putting money on that bet. They're probably the closest or most recent team I can think of to having that success.
I say I'm still in the opinion of you kind of have to take a team past 2010 to compare it to this team, because baseball was just different back then. Like, I understand it's the same sport, blah blah blah, whatever, but it's just different, and that's why I think the Astros, they have their
More
asterisks,
needles,
but I think, but I think that they are the closest comparison. It's just tough because they have their, everything with them and stuff. So I don't know. That's where,
I don't think the
like I
Astros can
said,
be considered a dynasty, but yeah.
Well, but here's the
It-
I guess here's the question: is what defines a dynasty? Is it just playoff success, or is it winning the big ring in the end?
I
I
think
think it
both.
depends on the sport.
We're
So
talking
We're
baseball.
a baseball podcast, so let's keep it.
I know.
I think
I'm
World
just
Series are
saying.
the triumph, but I think you have to look at postseason success. For example, the Astros, like, them making it to the championship series as much as they have, that is very impressive and very, like, they're very
Mhm.
successful. I think that's part of the dynasty. Now, the triumph is still World Series. If you have a team that's, let's just say the Dodgers win three World Series in 4 years, that would put them above the Astros. But, like, I think you have
Oh,
to look
absolutely.
at postseason success. Again, the more World Series you
I
have,
think-
the further you are in a dynasty.
I think
but
that's the tiebreaker of who's the better dynasty. Is the overall
Yeah.
that who gets the big trophy at the end of the ring. But I think postseason success is the ultimate factor of when you look back. You're gonna look at how long was that team successful? How long were they a thorn in the ass to face every year? And like, you dreaded having to face them in the postseason. And regardless of how many World Series the Dodgers may or may not win over the next 10 years, we all are in pretty clear agreement that they're going to make the postseason the next 10 years. And
Yep.
when that happens, they're going to have made the playoffs like 21 years in a row nearly. That's unheard of to just think about. So yes, if they
Yeah.
don't win 5 World Series immediately, you're going to have the immediate reaction of, it was a waste of money. It wasn't worth it or whatever. Regardless of however you want to look at the business side, you want to look at maybe how it position the Dodgers for future success, or maybe not future success because they'll be paying Ohtani $68 million for like 10 years after his contract ends. But you will eventually reach a point where you will look back and say, all right, did they win a lot of World Series? No. So they probably weren't up with X, Y, and Z dynasties. But God, they were a force to be reckoned with for 2 decades. And that's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a difference between being a force to be reckoned with and being a dynasty. To me, a dynasty means you have won the championship, or you have had consistent success uh, over a span of time. In baseball, I think you get 10 years. Other sports, it's less. Obviously, so you gotta take that into consideration. So we'll say over the next 10 years, the Dodgers, in order to be considered a dynasty, I would say they would need to be uh need to win 3 championships. However, I would say that even that isn't good enough for them because of the amount of money they spent. You know, I would say you have to win 4. You have to win 4, if not 5, in order for it to be justified.
I think this conversation is also going to change year by year because of, as I mentioned before, the Ohtani contract. They're going to be able to sign top free agents essentially every year. It's going to be a popular destination. So they're going to continue to build on this. And again, I think it'll be a year-to-year thing of the bottom line is they're going to expect to win the World Series every year. But I think as we go along year by year, that will also change the narrative of, okay, what do we need to be successful? Because, they could turn around next offseason. I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head who's like the big free agents for next offseason, but let's
Well,
just say
Soto's the big one I can think of.
yeah. So let's just say they sign Soto, right?
He's
That-
going there.
Technically, they would have a spot. Teoscar Hernandez is on a 1-year deal. They could slide
Right.
Soto in there.
Oh,
And then I may walk away from watching baseball because I know the Dodgers are just doing
right. So like
everything.
they can do that consistently because I mean, not for nothing. Like obviously Freeman is an awesome player, but like he's starting to get up there. But they'll find a replacement for him. They'll be able to find a replacement for whoever they want. Like that's what I'm saying. Like it's gonna change, I think.
So
So-
then here's the big thing then. So if we're gonna go with 3, because I feel like we're circling around this. So if we're gonna say 3
As the minimum, yes.
as the minimum, what else needs to happen? Like let's 10 years, just timetable, right? So 3 World Series at some point. What else needs to happen? Now, this is not going to happen, but I'm just saying like worst case. If they win 3, but they like don't get to the NLCS or NLDS for the rest of that time, is that still a dynasty? Like that's not going to happen. I know that's not going to happen. If that happens, then hell froze over. But like I'm just saying like what else needs to happen for them to, what's the golden ratio here, I guess is what I'm trying to figure out.
be a
So if we got
dynasty?
3 to be a dynasty, because I feel like that's what we're kind of at now with this conversation is like they're going to be a dynasty, but how are they going to be a dynasty? Like you're going to tell your future kid like about the 2020s to 2030s LA Dodgers, and that, you know what, by the way, just saying years like that is really weird to me, by the way. But like you're telling your kid about that, and you're like, yeah, they were good because they got 3 rings, and da 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 da. What else finishes that sentence?
So
I would
can I
go ahead.
can I give the Webster dictionary, or excuse me, the Google dictionary definition
Hon-
of a sports
Honestly, I'm
dynasty?
okay with.
Yeah, let's see.
Okay.
I was wondering who
In
was going to bring it up.
sports, according to Google, in sports, a dynasty denotes a team or individual that dominated their sport or league for an extended period. The use of the term to categorize such prolonged success emerged in the early 20th century. That last part wasn't
Oh,
necessary.
cool. So
but
it's just as vague as our answer so far.
Well, I was gonna say
I mean,
you
yeah,
gotta
it's,
you got
Yep.
it's all up for debate because it's
it
my
categorizes
success.
it as domination. But what do you
Well,
consider
but I'm saying
domination?
my
Exactly.
success is different from what you think the success is. So like it's all up for interpretation. I would say, Bobby, to answer your question, so 3 World Series rings, I would say um in the 7 years between World Series or championship series, like getting to it like three times, I would say. So you got 3 World Series, and then in another 3 years, you were either made the World Series or you were in the championship series and got bounced. I would say that's a success because in 6 years, you were the top 4 team 6 times, and I mean, that in itself is impressive. Also, they have to make the playoffs every year, which I also think will happen.
So
Mhm.
okay, let me add a whole other aspect to that answer. Then I know I want I want Will and John to answer that question too, but
You're
I
going to
do
give them
want
in
to
the
add
what?
I do want to add on. Does the separation between those 3 rings matter? Because let's say they win the 3 World Series back to back to back in the first 3 years and they don't make it back throughout the rest of those contracts. Does that matter too? That I feel like that is another aspect of this question.
I think
I'm
they're
gonna say
considered a
yes and no to that.
dynasty. Yeah,
I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna
say yes and
yeah.
no, but it
That's
shifts the range because of when that success started. Because you could argue right now they're still in the middle of at least an attempted dynasty. And again, whether you want to consider how they've made the postseason each year of the last 11 years as a dynasty, again, that's a whole other debate. But if they were to win the World Series the next 3 years, let's say then the next year they make the ALCS, and then after that they just always get eliminated in the ALD or the NLDS. Um, they would still be considered a dynasty, but I think you would then shift that range from like 2015 to 2025, 2026 or whatever, where they would have then made the World Series 6 times, I think it is, and won 4 of them. Um, so that's the thing to overlap now too is I don't think it matters in the sense that it could still be a dynasty regardless of where those 3 wins are. It's just that how you look at the best length of that dynasty depends on when it happens. Like if they all happen at the end, the success of the dynasty was then at the back end as everyone got older and they brought in whoever they had in 10 years. But if they get it now, then it'll be more of they just had a lot of success in the early 2000s and then um, things kind of tailed off after that.
yeah. I mean, I would say that you have that. It's similar answer in that sense, because it to win 3 back to back, or 3 out of 4, 3 out of 5, whatever. You can consider that a dynasty in that sense because you have that extended period of time where it's very clear that they were at least good enough to win those, and championships are typically a good benchmark on that success. So, you know, it I don't know. You kind of have teams of the decade when it comes to sports. A lot of times, at least I feel. So, like with baseball, you could say that the Astros are were the team of the 20s, the 2020s. You could say the Yankees were the team of the early 2000s. So you could say like that the Braves the team of the 90s. But you kind of have to categorize it in a way where you could say that you're a dynasty because you won 3 out of how many in a short period of time. But at the same time, it's almost like this is a moot point because it's almost like we're on a totally separate plane here that we've never come to before. I mean, this might all change in the next 7 years, the next 5 years. We might be having separate opinions because the rest of the league caught up to the
Mm.
Dodgers. So
And
that could
baseball
also be
spent a
something to
lot of money.
consider. Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of alluding to before with I think it's going to change on a year-to-year basis.
Mhm.
Because of who the Dodgers will be able to bring in, and as John said, will the league catch up? Who I'm sure the Yankees are obviously going to still be big spenders, and you'll still have your big spenders, blah blah blah, this and that. So it'll be interesting to see at that point. But yeah, I agree with Will in the sense that I think it kind of just changes your range on like, okay, they won their 3 World Series in the beginning. Well, their dynasty was kind of whatever
Then and
2015
there.
or whatever. So yeah, now you know that kind of brings up another point. It's like, okay, well, if you're starting at the Ohtani contract, if they win in the first 3 years and then don't win anything after, I feel like by the end of that, as a Dodgers fan, you're gonna feel like, yeah, we won the 3 World Series, but like after
Then
that,
what?
like, yeah, well, it's like we won 3, now the expectation's 4, now the expectation's 5. Like, it's their expectation every year is going to be to win the World Series. And John, as you said, look, they brought this on themselves, but this is now the reality of like, man, like it's all on us. There's nothing, you know, Roberts is a horrible manager, whatever. If that's your opinion, that's fine. But like you have no excuses with this roster now to win. Um as I said before, the league is very tough, but I think they'll continue to bring people in and it'll be interesting. But
The Dodgers
yeah.
should be sharpied into the NLCS every year for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I mean,
Not
like I
not
said,
penned, not penciled, sharpied.
and like I said, I think you need to. I quantify a dynasty as like if you're not going to win the World Series, you at least have to get to that top 4. Like I think if you make the NLCS, I think you can say you had a successful season. But yeah, obviously for them, they're going to be looking for World Series appearances, whatever the case may be. But
Does
um,
aging affect this at all?
What do you mean by aging? As in the
That's why
further
I
away
said the
we get.
first 5 years are crucial, is because I do think aging, you'll see whether or not people have injuries over that span and things could change. You'll have
yeah,
players that'll flip
I'm going to
flop.
say no.
But these
I'm
next
going
five
to say
years is
no.
when you're really going to have the core. Otani at his best for sure. Yamamoto, probably Glass now. Bobby Miller at least, because this will be at least near the end of arbitration by then. That's will be near the end of his contract, or at least older. Same with Freeman. So I think age will be a huge factor in the back half of the 5 year span of that 10-year contract.
Yeah, I guess I'm asking is like, is that the time though where there's like even an ounce of forgiveness? I mean, we can't say that Ohtani is going to be the same guy at 36, 35
right. Mm-hmm.
that he is now. I mean, he could. I'm not saying he can't. He's likely not going to, but I mean, he is the special type where he definitely could be one of the few that does end up being a timeless player. I mean, Max Scherzer's 39, and he's still getting paid big bucks.
Verlander's what, 42?
Yeah, Verlander's 41. He's getting paid 43. But we're not just talking about pitchers. We're talking about an all-star pitcher who is also an all-star hitter. So, is there any forgiveness there over to Will's point where the first 5 years are definitely crucial? Is there any forgiveness on the latter half? Definitely not in the first half, for sure. There's like no margin for error or any forgiveness whatsoever. But I guess I'm talking about like the latter half of all these contracts.
Let me tell you why I say no. Because the Dodgers can replenish and get the highest free agent every year, and they've proven that this year. So, there's no reason why age should not be a factor. You could say age is a factor in Ohtani's play, sure. But we're not talking about Ohtani. We're talking about the Dodgers. Baseball is one of those unique sports where an individual cannot really make a huge difference. And I say that because, like, in football, for example, you can have that star player that you get the ball to. All right, they score all your points. He bats one time every 4, rotations around the batting lineup. He pitches once every 5th day. So, Ohtani himself, this is a team thing. This is not just an Ohtani thing. You know what I mean?
But you're talking about a guy who is an all-star on both sides of the ball. Like,
yeah, I'm not saying he's not a factor.
No, but it's really hard to say that like an individual isn't going to necessarily carry a team. I would argue baseball, especially in terms of the major 4 in the United States, baseball is probably the sport where individual play matters more than anything else. There's exceptions, right? Like, I'm a Patriots fan. Tom Brady could have thrown to the janitor in the stadium and still probably could have thrown for 300 yards a game. I don't think that's disputed. However, for baseball, it's one-on-one most of the time. It is a pitcher to a batter, right?
You're right. It is, but he only gets so many appearances per game. It's not like it's a consistent, all right, he's always on the field. And that's my point. You get what I'm saying? Like, it's not like he's always there. He's not always in the batter's box. He's not always on the pitcher's mound. He takes his turn like everybody else. So I think this is very much so a team thing, not an Ohtani thing.
But he's
as
a guy who
much as
gets
we
paid
wanna make
70 million.
that. No, you're right. He does, but that's based on his individual play, but we're not talking about his individual play. We're talking about how the team of the Dodgers is spending that money on that for that individual player worth it to the team, not to, the player.
I
I'm
would
saying, is
definitely argue.
Ohtani worth it?
Yeah, look, I would definitely argue your point, Bobby, because I think, like, look at how much bullpens, like, how much what am I trying to say? Like, bullpens on the postseason. Your success a lot of the time is based off like this random bullpen arm that was at whatever in the season, but now he has got to come up in a high leverage spot and like whatever. I think obviously players like Ohtani can affect the game in a big way, but look at a sport like basketball, 5-on-5, like LeBron James in his prime is playing essentially all but 3 or 4 minutes in the game, and he's getting the ball every possession, so he can dictate every single possession what is going to happen with that, and he has full control over that. To John's point, Ohtani can't bat every time. Freddie Freeman can't bat every time. So in that sense, it has to be more team, but on the contrary as well, they also have a big part to it because every time they come up, they have to make their mark or whatever or be exceptional over their average players. But to go
You
back to
also
your
have to
original,
consider that the Dodgers are full of exceptional talent. You have Mookie Betts,
yeah.
you have Yamamoto, you have Freddie Freeman. Go down the list. Like, it's
So
more than
what
just
just
Ohtani.
I
just
thought
hard
Yamamoto
because
wasn't proven yet.
well, he's not.
I mean,
but,
he's not, but I'm just
so,
throwing out the name.
so
He's
I
projected
think
to be an exceptional talent.
yeah, like the thing is, like you can't rely on star power in baseball. I feel like basketball, but the Dodgers have so much star power, like their whole lineup is essentially star power, that it might that like in their
Negate
case it
that.
might not matter. What was I about to bring up? I lost my train
Well,
of thought.
wait. Can I?
But
Well, can I answer to something you just said? That like you can't rely on star power, but like every batting lineup, you always look at like, hey, I expect batters 1 through 5 to be able to do something. It's a plus if 6, 7, 8, and 9 do anything, right?
You expect
I
that,
feel like
they need
that's
to get
not a
on
great
base.
take.
They still
I
need to
get-
get on base.
I get that, but I'm saying to your point of like Ohtani controls, his performance has such a huge impact. I think it has an impact, but it just you were like, oh, in terms of like the other sports, like I don't think his impact is as great as a superstar basketball player. I don't think it's the same as like in the NFL, a Patrick Mahomes, a Justin Jefferson, like because they can have an
Be
effect on
fed.
every single play if they wanted
They
to.
can be fed.
Ohtani, you just can't. So you know they. And the other thing about baseball too is like everybody always says, and I know this is like an old thing. If you fail 7 out of 10 times in baseball, you're a Hall of Famer. Like with
Which is
baseball,
like 3 World Series over 10 years.
you're right. Exactly. So like,
Man, so Will's just sitting there waiting to be justified this entire
He
time.
was waiting. He was waiting for that. He wrote it on the board. He said, "Don't forget this. Don't forget it."
I thought about bringing this up like 10 minutes in, and I'm like, I can't really find a good point to slip in and say, hey, if you go 3 for 10 in baseball, it's batting 300, and that's considered great. So Thank you for
Yeah.
justifying my claim.
Tyler is dribbling down the court. You just see Will
Yeah.
take the ball and just slam it home.
I was gonna say, talking about basketball, I just gave him an alley-oop, and he just
Oh my
absolutely
God.
slammed it
No,
down.
you didn't give him an
I
alley.
broke the
He took it out of
freaking
your hands and
backboard
you're
with
like,
that
I am
slam.
finishing this. This game
well-
is over.
Yeah, dude. I mean, again, I think any way you look at it, I think the Dodgers, and I will wrap up this point here. Might have a few minutes to talk about a few other things quickly, but I think we're kind of all in agreement that for the Dodgers to make all this worth it, for make the billions and billions of dollars that they are going to spend over the next 10 years worth it, that 3 rings is probably the minimum. I know what I was going to bring before. The other thing I was going to say, you were talking about like replacing players and stuff. I think the 2 names you're really looking at for them that they're going to have to replace that are big time players for them over the next 10 years is Freeman and 3 players. I would say Freeman, Muncy, and Betts. So it's going to, determine who they bring in and who they can replace them with. Like if they can replace Teoscar Hernandez with a Juan Soto every season kind of thing, is that, that's also going to go to that as well. But we will end that conversation there quickly before we wrap up. We got news the other day that Cody Bellinger is sticking with the Cubs. Will, I just wanted to get
Called
your
that one, didn't I?
yeah,
Called
I
that
mean,
one,
look,
A
didn't
lot
I?
of people
I
called
said
this
it.
one.
yeah, yeah, you're not special. Relax.
Hey,
That's
no,
what he's telling
I
you.
want my moment.
But
Will
but
got
Will,
his
I
with his
mean,
slam dunk. I want mine.
Will, what are your thoughts on this one for both Bellinger and the Cubs?
I think this is a good fit for Bellinger because he had the success last year with Chicago. Um, Leaving LA seems to be the best thing for him right now. And now that he gets to go back with pretty much the same group of Cubs players that he was with the previous season, I think he's going to mesh back in perfectly. The team's going to embrace him, the city. He should still perform really well. If I don't think he's necessarily going to hit over 300 like he did last year. That seemed like a bit of a fluke to me. So I do think this propels the Cubs a bit more in the standings, which is already a very weak division. I just have questions whether this is enough to put them at the top of the division, or will they risk another collapse like last year, especially against in the back half of the season.
As of today, Pagoda has them at 81.9 wins, so a 500 team. So Pagoda doesn't think so, but obviously, I don't like Pagoda anyway. So whatever.
I
I don't know.
I think for Bellinger, this is like I think this is ultimately where he wanted to be in the end, and I think it's a good spot for him. He, as we kind of talked about before, I think last episode, he moves on from Dodgers, which we just talked about how the lights are always shining on them and the success. I mean, every year it's World Series or bust. You go to a team last year where obviously he played really well. Like Will said, I think those numbers come down a little bit this year, but he gets his bag and hopefully they can kind of build around him for their sake. As we said, the division is not the best, so uh 81 wins might get you closer to or around 81 wins might get you closer to a division title than we think, but we'll have to
I
see
will say
how it
one
goes.
thing that's interesting looking at Bellinger's stats and in last year compared to his time in um LA are the strikeouts. As you notice, he was a pretty much a mid, like he was 140s, 150 strikeout guy, except for 2019 and other years it was either 2020 or he got hurt. But last year in 130 games, he only struck out 87 times. That's ridiculous how much he cut
Yeah,
down on that.
yeah. And I kind of had wondered about if there was a swing change there.
Mhm.
What did the coaches in Chicago kind of do to, revitalize what was going on with him? And maybe that is the case, or maybe the approach is different and that correlates to that. But I mean, he was so good for them last year. One of the better players really, around the league. And he, again, gets his bag. He stays with the Cubs. I'm sure they're very happy about it. This is a guy that I think for their sake, they hope that they can get, maybe a little bit less, but somewhat similar production from the next 3 years, and they can maybe build something around him to get themselves back into the postseason. I'm bringing up my notes real quick as well. But yeah, like I said, I do think that is a big signing for them. Also, wanted to touch on Tim Anderson goes to the Marlins. I think that's interesting, based on Tim Anderson just being him.
At first, I thought you said Ghost of the Marlins. I was like,
No.
yeah, that does sum up Tim Anderson, doesn't it?
Liam Hendricks also goes to Boston. Will, that was a guy you wanted the Phillies to get, but he lands in
Yeah.
Boston,
Mhm.
which good signing for them, but unfortunate, obviously, for those other teams looking for a back end
How
guy.
about Snell and Montgomery still on the
Yeah, dude.
free agent block here?
So there was a report, and I don't know the validity of it, I guess, but it was reported that
I heard
Snell was
Yankees.
between, yeah, Yankees or Angels, and I think that's what we
And
had kind of thought.
I
I
think we said
personally,
Angels.
I
yeah,
didn't
I
think
think
Angels.
The Yankees, I think are the best fit for him and the team. And I do think there's a pretty good chance he goes there. But yeah, Montgomery's still out there as well. I mean, we are into spring training at this point now, and still not signed. I believe Chapman, I don't think got signed either. Matt Chapman, I'm pretty
Nope,
sure is
Chapman's
still out
still
there
out there.
too.
There's 3 of the Boris 4 still remain.
Yeah, JD Martinez is still out there. So, um,
I want me
it's
some
definitely
JD in
interesting.
orange and black. I want me some
Yeah,
JD. I think
I
we can
mean,
afford a JD. I don't know
I
about
think
a
a lot of
We
teams
Montgomery.
would
can
like
afford a
him.
JD.
Yeah.
Hey, he turned down an
uh,
offer to San Francisco, so we know where he doesn't want to be.
well,
Hey,
you
listen, he
know.
didn't want that orange and black. He wanted this orange and black right here.
He was waiting for that. With that, we will end the show here. Another great episode. That one was fun. Next week we'll be coming to you with a series of season previews for teams. We will be doing 3 separate ones, starting with the NL West and AL West. We'll be looking at talking more Dodgers, which I'm sure everybody is so excited about, but also talking about the other 9 teams in those divisions, giving some predictions, doing a roundup of all their offseason moves and what we think their season outlook is. And then again, that'll be over 3 weeks. And then from that point on, we will be at the start of the MLB season already. Absolutely crazy. But that is all for us at Big League Breakdowns. We hope you enjoyed. And like I said, we will be getting those episodes out next week. So make sure to follow our socials at Big League Breakdowns to keep yourself updated on those shows. But that is all for us. We'll see you next time.